Broadcasting from Detroit's Cass Corridor, it's the Metro on WDET. I'm Kerry Jr. II.
And I'm Tia Graham. Today on the show, shifts in our society, from foreign policy to local government, have shaped the way we all live our lives.
But how does America's diplomacy abroad compare to its citizens' views on international relations here at home?
Also, is it too much to find parents and guardians for teens who are out past curfew, or should there be alternatives to curbing the issue?
Plus, the Jackson House, which was once an important gathering spot during the Civil Rights Movement, is now the newest addition to Greenfield Village in Dearborn.
Learn more about an archive preserving the history of Detroit's once thriving Black communities, Black Bottom and Paradise Valley, conversations that take you around the globe and back. This is the Metro.
But first, almost a decade ago, President Donald Trump began campaigning on a very different American policy than the one we had. He wanted to be tougher on China, to build a wall, and to put America first. 10 years later, a lot of that strategy remained intact. How do Americans feel about our country's foreign policy stances? How do they want to see America lead? Rebecca Lissner is a senior fellow for U.S. foreign policy at the Council on Foreign Relations. Earlier this month, she began speaking with people around the country about what they make of American foreign policy. She's in town now to understand how people in Metro Detroit feel about the topic. Rebecca, welcome to the Metro.
Thanks so much, Kerry. Great to be with you.
Excellent. So what are you hearing about what people make of American foreign policy right now?
Well, Kerry, the project that we're doing is motivated by two facts. The first is that every single year since 2006, the majority of Americans have reported being dissatisfied with America's role in the world. But the second key fact is that even so, a growing majority of Americans support the United States of America playing an active global leadership role. So it's simply not true that the American people, whether here in Michigan or around the country, want the United States to retreat or to isolate itself. But Americans do want to see a foreign policy that works for them. And so my conversations in Detroit today, my conversations around the country are about scoping a new approach to America's role in the world and a new approach to global cooperation that's really grounded in the needs of everyday Americans.
What does that foreign policy look like based on what you've heard thus far?
So, Kerry, Americans want our country to be strong. They want America to lead. They want the United States to be a maker and not a taker of the global rules of the road. And if you look at public opinion polling in Michigan and around the country, it indicates that this is true of Democrats and Republicans alike, including Republicans who identify as MAGA Republicans. What that does not mean is that there is a blank check for leaders who are shaping American foreign policy. And I'll tell you that based on my conversations and my research, there are three basic conditions that I think the American people want to see for U.S. global leadership. The first is engagement without entanglement. Americans do not support prolonged foreign wars like the ones we saw in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they don't want American leadership to translate into those kinds of foreign entanglements. The second is that Americans really want to see our global leadership tied to a clear return on investment, or ROI, for Americans. They want to hear specific benefits that accrue to their safety, security, and prosperity tied to the investments that the United States is making in our foreign policy and work overseas. And the third is that international engagement simply can't come at the expense of domestic priorities and investment. Americans don't like to feel that Washington is sending money overseas when their communities are struggling. But so long as we can meet those three key conditions, the American people really do still want to see Washington playing a strong, active role shaping the 21st century.
Is it fair to say then that Americans, regardless of party, are starting to embrace this America First mantra?
I wouldn't say that it's about America first. I do think that the point about showing a clear return on investment matters quite a bit. To me, the most important point is that America first is often understood in the terms that it originated, which was a sort of fortress America desire for the United States to retreat inwards and not play a global role. But what I'm finding is that even for those who like the idea of America first in its incarnation today and in the foreign policy of Donald Trump, still want the United States to be out there, to be leading, to be strong. And so I think the key insight here is that America First is not tantamount to a retreat into Fortress America, but rather needs to inform how we talk about foreign policy and how it actually benefits concretely the American people, including people right here in Detroit.
I want to get some context for the people you've been speaking to. Roughly how many people have you spoken to, and what areas have you already gone to kind of get the information you're sharing with us?
Sure. So this is a global project. We have partners around the world who are all going outside of their capital cities in order to talk to citizens in India and in Brazil and in South Africa and France and in Germany about how their citizens see global cooperation. So what we're doing at the Council on Foreign Relations is the United States piece of that puzzle. We're canvassing public opinion polling, we're looking at focus group data, and we're also having conversations ourselves. We've been to Atlanta. Today we're in Detroit. Tomorrow we're going to Phoenix to talk to state and local leaders, elected officials, religious leaders, civil society leaders, academics, students to get a Gen Z perspective, all to add texture to the trends that we're seeing in public opinion data and better understand where Americans across the country are on foreign policy and then put that in a global context.
And have you noticed a difference between Americans who live here and Americans who maybe live abroad?
Well, I will say that in Michigan, the nature of the economy makes Michiganders very focused on trade. We know that as a northern border state, Michiganders are very focused on a relationship with Canada. The presence of the auto industry here in Michigan exposes many workers and businesses here to global supply chains and makes that a particular focus. And in particular, the growing presence of the defense industry, which employs more than 90,000 people here in this state, also makes people in Michigan particularly focused on that element. I was interested to learn that 60% of what an Army soldier drives or shoots actually comes out of Michigan, according to Senator Slotkin. So, of course, every context is shaped by local dynamics. And here in Michigan, those plus the diaspora ties that many Detroit citizens have to friends and families overseas seem to be the dominant factors.
Earlier in the conversation, you said that Americans don't like an isolationist approach, but President Trump has become popular in part because of his positions on building a wall, on being against immigration. Are those things not something that you find people are interested in?
So I would say that isolationism can mean a lot of different things. And certainly the symbolism of building a wall and certainly the closure of borders to immigrants would indicate a more closed posture and more isolated posture on certain issues. But, just today, President Trump was in Japan. He's on an Asia swing. He's meeting with Xi Jinping of China in Seoul, South Korea tomorrow. And all of that suggests that President Trump's foreign policy isn't actually about disengaging from the world. Whether you look at strikes just today on alleged drug trafficking boats in the Caribbean, whether you look at the president's commitment that he reiterated with the new prime minister of Japan to the U.S.-Japan alliance, whether you look at his interest in striking some kind of trade deal with President of China, Xi Jinping, all of that indicates that President Trump's America First foreign policy certainly has some elements of retreating from global leadership and retreating from global openness, but is not a strategy of complete retrenchment or retreat into an isolationist posture that sees the United States no longer present on the global stage.
But to some degree, it is about a zero-sum approach. He's placed tariffs on so many countries because he feels America has been losing on our trade policies. What do people say about the tariffs?
No, that is absolutely true. And I will tell you that there are many Americans, including here in Michigan, who strongly oppose tariffs, who see it creating unpredictability for their jobs, for their businesses, who are seeing effects on the supply chains that they rely on. And so there's certainly a lot of concern about tariffs, what it means for inflation, what it means for people's basic economic prospects. And I do think this is pointing to a much broader point. And I actually had an op-ed in the New York Times last week making just this argument, which is that even as President Trump is engaging with the world, what he's also doing is laying siege to the post-World War II system of rules, laws, and institutions that the United States of America built to make ourselves powerful, prosperous, and to organize global cooperation. And a key piece of that post-war system was always a free and open trading system. And the United States has largely defended that system and entrenched that system over time. But with historically high tariffs alongside actions like threatening to invade allies or retreating from democracy at home and from democratic partners abroad, we absolutely see the Trump administration undercutting that system. And in the piece, I say this is actually an unprecedented act of superpower suicide. We see President Trump actually attacking a system that has delivered unprecedented prosperity and security to the American people. And the problem is that he has nothing to replace it with. And so the concern is that the result will be a growing global disorder in a world that is more violent, more economically contested, and frankly, more influenced by China.
You're listening to The Metro on 101.9 WDET, Detroit Public Radio. I'm Kerry Jr. II. I'm speaking with Rebecca Lissner, a senior fellow for U.S. foreign policy at the Council on Foreign Relations. We're discussing how Americans feel about our country's foreign policy stances. Now, Rebecca, I know you said that people are concerned about the tariffs for economic reasons, but do people like the approach of tariffs because they are a sentiment that we've lost out to the world, and we need to be doing better? Are they a way for us to showcase dominance, which some Americans at least like?
So I would say that based on my conversations, Americans hope to see a system that has a few attributes. One is they want an international trading system that clearly benefits the United States. They don't like the idea that we would be sustaining a system that allows other countries to take advantage of American businesses and American workers. Second, they hope to see an international trading order that provides predictability to U.S. businesses and workers. And a key challenge that many have experienced with the Trump administration's policy thus far has been the acute unpredictability that has come since April 2nd with so-called Liberation Day from President Trump's tariffs, which go up and then they go down and they change, which makes it really hard for businesses and workers to plan on a stable basis. And third, the Americans who I've spoken with want to see the gains from trade more equally distributed. And one critique that I have heard is that much of the recent years of free trade and globalization have made the rich richer, but haven't necessarily benefited workers and many Americans. And so they hope to see an international trading system that advances greater equality rather than just helping the rich.
And so to Detroit, in your conversations with people in this metro region, who will be at that event, that talk, and how will that conversation be set up?
I'm having a series of conversations over the course of the day with state and local elected officials, with students at Wayne State University, and with a broad swath of labor leaders, business leaders, civil society leaders, academic leaders, and so on. So I can't tell you exactly who's going to be there because we promised that we wouldn't share their identities publicly, but it's going to be a broad cross-section of generations, of sectors, and representative perspectives from all around the Detroit metro area.
Yeah, a hodgepodge of a lot of different folks here from age, demographics, and backgrounds. What is this information for? What are you going to do once you've heard from all these different people?
So as I mentioned, this is one piece of a global project. And the goal might sound really ambitious, but what we're actually hoping to do is try to come up with fresh, new principles that can guide the United States approach to global cooperation. Because the thing is, Kerry, no matter how you might feel about President Trump's foreign policy, the reality is the United States of America is immensely powerful, whether you look at our military power, the dynamism of the American economy and workforce, our leadership in emerging technology like AI. And so there's this huge question, what are we going to do with all of this power? The American people want us to be strong, but what do they want us to be strong for? And so the goal of this project is to incorporate all of these perspectives, recognizing that leaders and elites in Washington, D.C. have not always best understood what the American people want to see out of our foreign policy. So by actually asking people around the country, we're trying to create a new approach to America's role in the world and a new approach to global cooperation that is truly grounded in the demands that we hear from all different types of Americans for how American foreign policy can best serve them and their families and their communities.
And have these discussions with people confirmed what you believed about how American foreign policy perceptions have shifted?
It's such an interesting question. And I will say, actually, the strength of support for American global leadership is stronger than I expected. My assumption going into this project was exactly where you started, that Trump's America First movement actually indicated that the United States or that the American people were less interested in playing an active global role. We're less interested in investing national resources in our work overseas. But in fact, I've found that the demand for American leadership and American strength is still very strong, but we need to change the terms on which it is exercised. And one thing that I've heard in my conversations, especially talking to Gen Z Americans, but you see this borne out in public opinion data as well, is that Americans are supportive of our global leadership, but decreasingly likely to see the United States as exceptional or as the greatest country in the world. And I think that reflects a combination of events and crises, from the financial crisis to wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, to growing concerns that many Americans have about democratic erosion and growing corruption inside the United States as a result of President Trump's actions. So taken all together, I think this makes many Americans wary of telling other countries how they should operate or how they should govern themselves. And that is a change from much of post-Cold War American foreign policy, which saw us taking a very active role in trying to shape how other countries govern themselves, what kinds of regimes they had. So I don't think that there's support from the American people anymore for taking such a heavy-handed approach, including especially military interventions aimed at changing regimes overseas. Now, whether the Trump administration goes forward with some kind of military operation aimed to change the regime in Venezuela, we don't yet know. But if he does so, I think that any war to that effect would be at odds with what I'm hearing the American people want to see from their foreign policy today.
I see. Now, you've written a few books. One of them is An Open World, where you argue that American security and prosperity can only be protected with a strategy of openness. Why do you think that's true?
The United States can only be safe in an open world because we are exposed to the global economy, and our security requires access to all key regions around the world. And so a key insight of the book is that we cannot allow a country like China to close off East Asia from access by the United States, to do things like restricting shipping through the South China Sea, which would have a potentially catastrophic effect on our economy, not to mention the risks associated with China taking over Taiwan, which is where most of the advanced semiconductors that power the global economy come from. And this isn't just an abstract question. When President Trump meets with President Xi this week, one of the questions will be the future of America's policy towards Taiwan. The Chinese president very much hopes to find a way to annex Taiwan and to diminish Taiwan's independence. And the longstanding U.S. policy has been to try to prevent that from happening in the context of the one China policy. And many observers are looking to see whether President Trump makes concessions on Taiwan that might make it more likely that China could gain control over Taiwan in the next few years in such a way that would close off that key part of that world or that key part of the global economy from the United States. That's the kind of movement that we can't allow to happen, and that we argue in the book would be very damaging to American interests.
But open is not where the country is at this moment to some degree, right? Are you trying to convince people in these conversations that we should be more open in terms of our political influence and in trade? Are you finding that people either already agree with that stance?
Carrie, it's such a great question. And I'll tell you, the book was published in 2020. And if I were titling it today, I wouldn't call it An Open World, because you're right. From the COVID pandemic to growing concerns that Americans had under the Biden administration about open borders, it's clear that the idea of openness is not where most Americans are today. I think we have to understand that the idea of open borders, whether it comes to the movement of people or the movement of goods and services, that simply isn't the winning political argument today. So I would absolutely agree with you there. But nevertheless, when we're thinking about the global structure, it's still very important that the international system remain open And that gets to what I was just talking about the real concerns associated with any kind of move towards what's called spheres of influence, the idea that we should let China dominate Asia, we should let Russia dominate Europe, and that the United States should just focus on the Western Hemisphere. My core argument is that the United States cannot be safe in that kind of world, and so we need to continue to exercise our power and work with allies and partners and renovate international governance on issues like trade, but also AI, climate, pandemics, to make sure that the United States can still lead a world that delivers benefits to the American people.
I guess just to wrap it up, I just want to know more about what it's like when you come into conflict with people who don't feel the same way that you do about being open on an international stage. What are those conversations like? And do you feel like those conversations are constructive enough to where we're moving in the right direction?
I think I always try to approach conversations in the most constructive possible way. We all know that in our private lives, there are some people with whom you can speak constructively and others whom you can't. But I find that there's still enough that Americans can agree on. And even amongst those who don't agree, I mean, I'll tell you, when we have these conversations around the country, we're doing it on a bipartisan basis. And when I was in Atlanta recently, we had a Republican mayor of a local town sitting next to a Democrat elected representative. And they agreed on more than they disagreed. And so I think it's easy to focus on all the ways in which the American people are polarized and disagree, and those are really important. But I actually think when it comes to these questions of global leadership, there's considerably more consensus and agreement amongst broad swaths of Americans than the typical discourse would have you believe.
All right, Rebecca Lissner is a senior fellow for U.S. foreign policy at the Council on Foreign Relations and a Brady Johnson Distinguished Practitioner in Grand Strategy and lecturer with the Jackson School of Global Affairs at Yale University. Thank you, Rebecca, so much for having this conversation, for hashing all this out with us.
Thanks so much, Carrie.
Up next, the city believes raising the fee for breaking curfew will reduce crime among teens. Experts disagree. We'll discuss why after the break. This is The Metro.